Thanks very much, Jenny, and well done, Anne. I mean, it's a classic example. Yes, it's a water project ultimately, but that integration of nature and so on, and that's ultimately what we need to do, and it's the only way we can be successful actually as well. And you can see the key characters there are generally farmers, and if we think about things slightly different and think, well, what does the farmer need? What are the supports that are needed there, and how do we develop from there? As the computer people say, consider the end user and operate from there. So yeah, I'm project manager of, we're moving to slightly less optimal agricultural land, I suppose, depending on your perspective. I'm Derek McLoughlin, I'm the project manager of Life IP Wild Atlantic Nature, and we have a particular interest in blanket bogs, but all of the adjacent habitats and within those systems as well. And again, if I talked about blanket bogs, I'd be falling into that trap of the classic scientist trap, which I am, and I generally fall into, of the focus on the one entity, the one habitat, the one species, you know, even the one system. We have to think about how these landscapes function. I know we learned an awful lot in the last number of years from Jenny and Donal and lots more of you besides from a water perspective. So I don't have any text on this slide actually, but I will just explain to you that this is an integrated life project similar to Anne's as well. It started in 2021 and it runs to 2029. It's got a core fund of 20 million with a whole load of associated beneficiaries that I'll show in a minute. Of course, the triggers behind this, the patterns of our nature in Ireland in terms of the trends and how they're doing, their status are very similar to water because they're completely connected. We also have to put our suit on to go to the European Court of Justice to explain why we're not meeting our targets, etc. We have various peatland infringement cases, conservation measures cases, and so on for our failure to protect bogs and, of course, associated habitats as well. So I'm employed by National Parks and Wildlife Service as project manager, and we've got 9 associated beneficiaries that are up on the board there from Portmona, Cuilcha, Department of Agriculture, RTE, Teagasc, Heritage Council. I've started, so I'll finish, as I say, University de Santiago de Compostela, Northern and Western Regional Assembly, and Fáilte, Ireland, and they, you know, do tasks that you would imagine, like, you know, Cuilcha, of course, are involved in forest to bog, etc. So, just to explain really about how we view the world within the project and how we've developed it, we look at the threats and pressures, but we look at the drivers behind those. What are the policy mechanisms that give rise to the pressures and threats? How is the policy influenced by the practice? You know, the practice on the ground from our farming, our forestry, and so on. And how is the farming and forestry and other activities, how is that influenced by the policy? And of course, all of that is influenced by place. What's appropriate in a certain area that gives rise to the type of farming, the type of nature, the culture that's in the area, the turf cutting, the traditional ways, or the modernised ways, intensive agriculture, etc. So we're somewhere in the centre there. And like ultimately, what is it all about? What is the take-home message from today? Well, I suppose this is the take-home message. Maybe we could park the presentation after this, but the take-home message is ultimately that we're after high quality. We want to reward high quality. That's the high quality is in the habitats, the ecosystem services, and so on, the outputs, the water quality, and we want to support and reward that, and we want to support the improvement of poorer quality. So it's a simple enough message there in that respect. So we also built on previous results-based programs, particularly the likes of the Pearl Mussel Project and the other EIPs, Hen Harrier and the Burren Programme and so on. And in 21 and 2022, we put a lot of effort into looking to scale that up across about 800 plus farmers, over 65,000 hectares of land that went through this results-based process. The basis of the results-based payments is that the higher the ecological quality, the higher the score, and the higher the score, the higher the payment that a farmer receives, thereby creating a kind of market for ecosystem services. And of course, if you're scoring low, you get little or no payment, but we can support you to help with that. So ultimately then that fed in, and there was a lot of effort at the time with Jenny and colleagues. Jenny, you'll remember the man's an ounce sweated at that time in a really collegiate way with ourselves and in national parks, yourselves, Department of Agriculture, and it was actually a great a coalition, I think, to try and to do our best. I saw Cormac McNickley there as well, who got repetitive strain injury from clicking the mouse with all of the targeting that he was doing on the mapping at the time. But ultimately, Acres then took on board a lot of the learnings here. Now there's over 1 million hectares being scored annually or every second year across all of these cooperation project areas in Ireland. And this is Acres cooperation, of course, across 8 areas with 5 different teams. But this gives us an implementation mechanism by which we work. So when we talk to farmers, when we talk to whoever, it's back to that ethos. High quality is rewarded. Yes, there are faults and failings and so on and things that need to be improved, but ultimately high quality is rewarded. And then we can come along in our kind of next phase and start to just go about actually improving that. So as I say, there are cooperation project teams in each area. Now, I will say before I talk about this is that, well, what are you doing, says you, I suppose what we're like middle men and women in that we kind of shuffle to where the need is in this instance. So we would feel that we create the opportunity through the development of results-based programs. Then they become part of the overall CAP programme. So then we kind of look to build up capacity to be able to deliver those. And the cooperation project teams are an ideal mechanism to be able to do that, to provide support for farmers, to understand things on the ground that maybe us as scientists are a bit blind to sometimes on the ground and the realities of working here. So we've provided a huge amount of training here in Scotland and so on, in development of the skills and expertise there to be able to deliver peatland restoration actions. We have a whole host of demonstration sites within each of the cooperation project areas. So we've got groups that can do and can implement this. We've got the data there as well. This is about 10 kilometres across. Typical enough, 0 to 1 is red, and everything in between is in between, and the green, dark green, is high scoring from your 8, 9, 10 out of 10. So clearly, where are you going to target your measures? In this instance, from a peatland perspective or associated habitats, we're looking at the reds. And I can promise you, and we know from our data, that the water quality reflects that very similarly as well. So we can target those areas in terms of the interventions. What about the guys that are already doing well? Well, they're already getting rewarded. So there isn't the perverse incentives that you can sometimes build into these. And this builds a kind of a pipeline of sites. There's Francis. I only saw him for the first time in years down here, but he's in that picture there. This builds a pipeline of sites that will allow us to target for restoration. We develop restoration action plans, and we go in and implement those. We've got a whole process. Jesus, it's like, I know that looks like the back of a very complicated plug, but they're the steps that we do internally to process our restoration action planning in terms of our own compliance and regulations and so on, and that is expensive in itself, and a whole host of work in the administration side of things. But ultimately, we have a pipeline of sites of about probably about 180 sites that are under restoration and so on. And they're distributed throughout the west coast of Ireland as it stands, and we're broadening from there. There are 2 maps of Ireland. One of them is just the status as of a year or just over a year ago. The one in the middle is actually different funding sources. So we're an integrated life project, as Anne has mentioned as well, and we have a remit for complementary funding. Our core fund is 20 million, but we've brought in over 45 million extra in additional funding to deal with various different, sites, restoration programs and so on as they have come about. So there's 11 different funding sources there. So it's really quite complicated with 25 additional projects to the core life project, in themselves. So the rate of restoration, I suppose over the last couple of years, that within the project itself, we're facilitating about 1,000 hectares a year, and we feel that can be really ramped up in the near future. And just some examples. We fund some directly. We manage every little aspect of it directly. Here's one that we would have just connected the landowner with a funder, a German funder actually, that funded 100% of the restoration. This is 750 hectares of blanket bogs that we would have just been a facilitator in. Other sites, for example, we're a partner on the Horizon 2020 Waterlands project, and we have an action site of about about 500 hectares or thereabouts in Culkinear Uplands SAC, and we use that as an additional resource to extend our footprint and our reach, to demonstrate good practice, to use it as a hub to train and all of that kind of stuff. So that's obviously our results-based, the setting of it. We've got the capacity side of things. We've got the land restoration programme and how we kind of manage that as such. And as I say, I'd be at meetings with farmers most weeks, I would say, and as someone will fold their arms and say, what are you going to do about the turf cutting, And I suppose it is a massively difficult question, because we're continuing to cut turf in SAC lands, in our instance in the Blankabog SACs. We have a case that could bring the biggest fines on us, for our failure to implement the Habitats Directive here. So the approach that we're using here is we have aligned, I suppose, with our national retrofitting programme with SEAI, and we ultimately have a pilot where we're retrofitting the homes to reduce the need for turf cutting in those instances to zero pretty much. So the deal is we will retrofit your home and coordinate the grants that are available and augment with the remainder with our own funding, and we will restore your lands in there as well. So the reality is, when you really root down to it, although it's a strong cultural part, people need to heat their homes in these areas. It's very often, might be a man by himself, an old couple by themselves. You can't get help in the bog, even if you wanted it. The niece is gone, the son's above in Dublin, the daughter's gone to Australia. There's no one around. There aren't people in these areas to help as such. It is very hard. You might get the one bumper day out where everyone's around and everyone will, to bring home the turf maybe or whatever. But the reality is the social pressures there that aren't environmental, that I suppose we have a strong focus on there as well. And then the last kind of, I suppose, maybe innovation we have is what we call Natura communities. We've created a very strong demand for restoration of these areas. Now, who goes and does that, and how do you standardise, how do you validate their skills and expertise and so on? So we decided that maybe a good idea, and it really came from one man who's in that photo there, Martin Gavin, in Leenane in Mayo there. So he came to us one day, and actually as part of the Pearl Mussel Project EIP, which I previously worked on, and he says, look, what are you going to do about it? You're putting money into the national parks for rhododendron control, as it was at the time. What about farmers? Why can't we avail of any of this funding? So just thinking, right, maybe if you had funding source that a local community, or a locally embedded kind of group could go and develop restoration action planning, stakeholder engagement, and go and deliver what a lot of us, here at this conference deliver, but it's delivered on a local basis. How could that work? So we piloted it a couple of years ago, and it started to develop to the point now where we've got, it's aligned with rural development policy. It's generally like the likes of local development companies that are running this, not always, but generally. And there are now over 50 people working full-time on these programs. They do invasives control, they do peatland restoration. They've trained in all of that, through our own training programs in Scotland and so on. And it has really taken off. So it's a going concern. So as someone once said to me, we've kind of monetized the problem there. We're developing a validation process there, certification, so that in these areas where there is issues, social issues in terms of jobs, employment and so on, and they are travelling all the way out into Galway from West Connemara or whatever to work on a site, there's something local. They're already farming the area, they know the area, but they've got a new skill. And that's left forever in that area, the skill of how to manage what we all want landowners to manage. So there's 3 areas, Donegal, Mayo, Erris, Natura Community, and Connemara, and we're expanding it to these others here as well. And it now includes a programme for Corncrake. So, they do the whole shebang in terms of restoration, etc. So the one thing I would say about them as well is that they're massively proud of their area, and if you try and take that away, God help you. So the idea there that restoration equals opportunity is really, really important. There's loads and loads, and every week there's a week that goes by that there isn't some reference to these groups. They publicise themselves. There's loads of, local councillors meet this person or that person or whatever, and they self-publicise. So that creates momentum in itself. And then the pressure is on us to find the money, to provide the expertise and so on, to do what we're supposed to be doing anyway, So that's really, really important. I think last week or the week before, there was Wild Connemara, and I know Dúlra are one of the Natura groups that cover Connemara. They were on it, and there was a lot of interest out of that. So that's all very good. Just the monitoring side of things, I think I'm nearly there anyway. I mean, all of this is well and good. And I know you're thinking, right, he's talking. What about where's the data and so on? No, there isn't a data slide here, I'm afraid. But ultimately, we have a really considerable data program, a monitoring program that we, I suppose, have two strands to it. One is the characterisation of the types of bogs that we have from a greenhouse gas, hydrology and an ecological perspective, and then also looking at the impacts of our more obvious and more common interventions on bogs. So you're eroding blanket bogs and there are interventions there, artificial drainage, i.e. your drained peatlands and so on, forest to bog restoration and turf banks. So there's a lot going on in that area. I mean, in this instance, it's a case that we want to link that our greenhouse gas data can be somewhat related to proxies like our acres scorecards and so on, is something that's very important. And it's the only way, ultimately, when we look at the huge amount of work ahead of us all to improve our environmental situation, that's the way that we must go. So almost to conclude, again, another back of the plug kind of diagram, but ultimately, like where we're at here is we've got a core element of what I'm saying is that pipeline of sites that feeds into our various directives, feeds into our incentives for landowners and so on. And it's underpinned by various threads, including our monitoring MRV, our financing, and indeed the development of capacity building. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, it's again in a final fling, I suppose. It's ultimately about cohesion across the various different policy strands: our climate, our rural development, our social, our environmental, and our economic. Thanks very much.